Okay, so we'll start with 2014, but we don't have to go draft. But you can pick any pick. I'll give you the first pick in this draft. Okay. The worst picks of the last decade.
I'm off the clock. I'm ready to make my selection.
You are already. We don't even need the 1 minute countdown timer.
No countdown.
You know exactly what pick you're going to take.
Yes.
With the first pick in the worst draft picks of the last decade since 2014. Sam Sheehan selects.
I select Marvin Bagley, 2018, with the Sacramento Kings selection.
Let's go.
Baffling at the time, even more baffling in retrospect. Maybe I am unnaturally harsh on this pick because I was very out on Marvin Bagley. I said it's very clear that he is going to be a nothing play. Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman, these guys are never good. The ultra Bagley was, I guess, a little bit less raw than Wiseman was.
He was a good college player, yeah.
Yeah, but these guys, these bigs who can't shoot and aren't unreal block and defend guys are they never ever pan out. These offensive Jahlil Okafor was good. His team won the national title. Terrible NBA player. And Marvin Bagley's been better than Jahlil Okafor and some of these other guys that I mentioned, but Luka fucking Doncic was on the clock. Everyone, you dodge the bullet of the Suns drafting Ayton because Sarver's a moron. I'm like, oh, this guy went to college here. Awesome. And it was
also in defense of Ayton, insane tools, very good college player. Not saying he's better than Luka Doncic or even was close to him as a prospect, but you can get the idea more so than Bagley. At the time, Bagley was seen as what you're describing. Ayton, at least in theory, could be a dominant two-way big, and the league has historically always thrived on dominant two-way bigs.
Yeah, I mean, Ayton was soft. You could see that this stuff where it's he didn't want to shoot. He was taking long twos and shit like that in college. So I was always scared of that stuff. But yeah, what you're saying, it makes sense, but it was a shock because the Suns had hired fucking Luka's old coach to coach that team this year. It seemed like a foregone conclusion they were going to draft him. They didn't. So now you have a chance to draft Luka Doncic. The Kings have a long history with European players, particularly Eastern European players. It made so much fucking sense to just fucking draft Luka Doncic. And they didn't even really need bigs at the time. I'm trying to remember. I think they ended up were going to play Bagley at small forward at that point. I'm trying to remember who their bigs were, but they had two bigs in place when they made the selection.
In 2018, they had just traded Boogie, right? They had just traded Boogie for.
I think it was Hield. Had they traded Boogie? I think I think for starters they had Boogie and Willie Cauley-Stein also on the roster. For
Willie Cauley-Stein was the center, I believe, and I thought they were going to play Bagley at the 4, if I remember correctly. But I do know for a fact that I'm almost positive Boogie was traded at the end of at the 2017-2018 trade deadline. Before this draft.
He was drafted 2017. Okay, he was gone. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
2017, he got traded because remember he got traded at the All-Star game.
That's right.
Yes, I'm fairly certain they were interviewing him at the All-Star game when he was traded for Buddy Hield to New Orleans, and this was in Buddy's second season, I think, in the NBA. Might have even been earlier than that. But long story short, Boogie was gone, and Bagley was there, and I think Cauley-Stein was the center, if I remember correctly. But
Costa Kuvos is who I'm thinking of. Yeah, who they played substantially. It's going to sound insane, but he was good. They also had drafted Skal Labissiere at that point. He was good. He was fine. He was a rotation player.
Okay.
They also had Caleb Swanigan and Skal Labissiere, who they had drafted. Also, Harry Giles was on the team. So they had just a total logjam in their front court. Now, maybe those guys suck, but they didn't have any need whatsoever. On the other hand, they had De'Aaron Fox and literally nobody else.
Well, Buddy? I think it was De'Aaron Fox, Buddy, and then a bunch of nothing basically. No one that had any meaningful value on their team. And part of the reason why I became so against the idea of ever drafting for fit was this draft. Because the 2018 draft, they didn't draft Luka because they wanted to pair Devin Booker with a skilled big who could fit better with what they wanted to do. They pass on Luka, even though Luka Booker now, I think we know. I mean, what is Devin Booker if not a better version of Kyrie Irving?
Devin Booker is also like besides Durant, probably one of the most malleable off-guard, and Steph. It's like Durant and Steph are like the only other two guys who can like function off the ball better than Devin Booker probably.
And also, I just want to point out that we knew this information at the time too, because in college, that was his role. Like, he was not always an on-ball hyper, run 100 pick and rolls a game guy. Like, he, in theory, could have worked with a guy like Luka. And in retrospect, it's easy to, it's not something that, what I'm trying to get at here is that we knew at the time, and also we know now. Like, it's even more obvious now, obviously, but like every smart person was saying at the time, Luka should have been the pick. I can understand the 8 pick a little bit more, but in terms of why you never draft for fit when you're a bad team, like you have like 2 NBA players, is this draft basically, because you're not at a point where you're just meaningfully good enough to be drafting based on, when you're drafting for fit, you should be looking for one guy to get you over the top. A good example of drafting for fit is years later, not even years later, a year after this, when they drafted Cam Johnson. Like, that's a fine pick because Cam was a little bit older. And I think, everyone saw that as a reach at the time. I really like Cam Johnson in that draft. I wanted the Sixers to get him at 19 or wherever they picked in that draft. But it is more importantly, like, if you are drafting for fit, you need to have your core pieces in place, and then that guy needs to be the last kind of piece to get you into the playoff conversation, into the contendership, whatever it is. You shouldn't be drafting for, fucking fit when you win 20 games the year before. You always take the best player available. And if things don't work out with, Luka Doncic in terms of he doesn't fit with Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox, then trade Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox. And those are amazing players, but that's just kind of the example that I tend to use in terms of being against drafting for fit as opposed to best player available. So I think Bagley's a very obvious candidate. And the thing about the 2018 draft, and I think it will come up again throughout this draft, the thing that's so painful about the 2018 draft is you always mention that Luka was 1 pick later. Jaren Jackson Jr. was the 4th pick, and Trae Young was the 5th pick. So, to miss in that top 5 and to come away with a player who is now on his 3rd team in the NBA, and even with Ayton, they probably shouldn't have given him that max contract, but they were able to get something back for him, something in getting Nurkic and Grayson Allen. Bagley, they basically, they got a half a season of Dante DiVincenzo before he walked, and they got really nothing out of that pick, which is just it's a real franchise killer when you have a top 3 pick and you walk away in a loaded draft and you walk away with nothing. So very, very good number 1 overall pick.
So to your point, you've got 3 All-Stars are the next 3 picks. And then you have you've got your Mo Bambas and your Kevin Knoxes or whatever. But then you also have Mikal Bridges, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Well, they got Mikal Bridges. That's the feather in there. Or no, I'm sorry, the Sun. We're talking about the Kings. I'm sorry, not the Suns.
Yeah, Mikal Bridges, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Michael Porter Jr., Dante DiVincenzo was 17 in this draft.
Brunson was the 2nd round pick. Not that he would have ever went at the top of the draft, but just pointing that out.
Michael Porter Jr. He had bad back medicals, but up until that point was in this conversation. It wouldn't have shocked me.
Projected number 1 pick at one point.
Yes, it wouldn't have shocked me if he went 6th instead of Mo Bamba in this draft. That would have totally made sense.
Good culture fit with the Magic too.
Mikal Bridges could have gone anywhere in this range because they were national championships, and those guys always have a little bit. The only knock on Mikal Bridges was that he was old for his draft class. Everybody thought he was going to be pretty good. So it really is one of the hardest drafts to miss in. Had a generational player in Luka, 2 other All-Stars, and they still missed. It is by far the most damaging pick The only one that's close is Ayton. And for the reasons that you said, the Ayton is like a little bit less worse because it wasn't a nothing. Like they did get a starting level NBA center at least, and they did at least make the finals at one point, like on the back of that pick. Like
he was a key piece of that team too. Like he was the third or fourth best player on that team. So
Bagley was nothing. Yep. Bagley was getting this is true. The next year, Bagley's sophomore year. Do you want to you want to know who had more starts than Bagley that year? Bagley had 6. Dwayne Dedman had 10.
Let's go.
Just like terrible.
Yeah, just pretty inexcusable. All right, so there's a few different picks that I can take here. I think there are some obvious ones. And I'm gonna save the one that I wanted to take for a little bit later.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go with, you know what? Okay. I'm just gonna take him now.
Don't make me do it.
Do you want to take James Wiseman, I assume, with the third pick?
No.
Okay. You know what? At first I almost thought about not taking Marquel Fultz.
That's the one I didn't want you to make me take.
So here's the thing. The Sixers getting lucky on the back end of this, because the cope that I've always said as a Sixers fan, if you are going to look at the worst draft picks, what did they turn those picks into eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
They took, Marvin Bagley turned into half a season at Dante DiVincenzo and nothing, and he did nothing for the Kings positively. Fultz was never anything for the Sixers. They traded him in his second season. They made the trade for Jimmy Butler earlier in the year and Tobias Harris, and it made Fultz kind of irrelevant. The Sixers, by the skin of their teeth in that trade, got a pick that they had already traded to the Orlando Magic. They got that pick back, and they got lucky enough that it became the 21st pick of the 2020 draft, that it became Tyrese Maxey. But that doesn't skirt them from the responsibility of, if you look at 2017 and all the information we know now, which we didn't know at the time, because if you look back at that draft, everyone said Fultz should have been the first pick. It was a no-brainer.
Yes, agreed.
You've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast. You wanted the Celtics to draft him.
Yes.
You didn't want to trade down and draft Jason Tatum.
Correct.
And in a way, this seems like revisionist history for us to say that this could be one of the worst picks. Now, obviously, we have all the information now, but I do just want to point out a few things why this is such a bad pick. One, they obviously traded up. They gave up additional draft capital. Now that pick became Romeo Langford, so it didn't end up being anything except for a special place in Sam's heart. But
which is important, by the way.
Which is important. Don't count that out.
Cut that out. Yeah, that's very important.
Any women have
vied for this spot, the Romeo Langford spot.
Many Juliets have vied for the spot that Romeo holds.
Yeah, they want me to be the Romeo. No, there's only one Romeo in my heart, and it's Romeo Langford. Anyway, continue.
So not only do the Sixers this is the last time that they pick at the top of the draft. So at least with like Okafor and all of these whiffs they had before, Michael Carter-Williams, they're at least getting more cracks at the top of the draft. This is the last time that they pick at the top of the draft with their own pick, with the Fultz pick. They gave up additional draft capital to get him. And years later, we find out that they brought in Marquel Fultz for a workout, and Fultz only agreed to do that workout after the Sixers traded for the number one pick. He has a mental breakdown in the workout. He can't perform. There's all these questions about him, and the Sixers had already traded up, given up the draft capital at the time. So we didn't know that as the public, and we're like, why the fuck would you not just draft Fultz? What's going on here? And then later, all this information comes out. It makes more sense now. We know everything that happened. There's also some weird, we don't know if it was a shoulder injury or a mental thing with the shooting. At a certain point, it just got to the point where the Sixers had to move on, and they trade him a year and a half later for basically nothing. They got lucky that turned into Tyrese Maxey. But the reason why this pick is so destructive is because we also know that Drew Hanlon at the time was telling the Sixers, draft Jason Tatum. He was working out Joel Embiid at the time. They would have obviously made a great duo together. And you miss out on this chance to put together the Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons before his brain broke, and Marquel Fultz big three that would have really put all of these things together for the Sixers that probably would have got them past the point of the playoffs that they've got this far, if not just being a legit contender for the last 6 years or however long it's been since that draft. So bad pick because you can never miss on the number one pick. You gave up additional draft capital. You pass on Jason Tatum, who's one of the best players in the NBA. And even if you had drafted Lonzo Ball, you probably would have gotten a few good years out of Lonzo Ball. And you could talk yourself into that before he gets injured. He would have at least give you something productive as a player. But instead, we're now talking about Fultz being one of the biggest busts of the last decade.
I guess that's the thing, is like, it's the ultimate in bad process in terms of like being embarrassing. Because like, why not just stay put? Like, why even give the bastard Danny Ainge the chance to embarrass you like this? Like,
if a good GM is calling you and saying, "Yeah, we'll trade them," how is that not set off alarm? But look, because Danny at the time was on top of the world. Like Danny had,
this was his heat check. Like this was a heat check GM moment for him. Yeah,
he was going nuts. Like he's washed now, but 6-7 years ago, he had fleeced the Nets in that trade. He was, making moves left and right. If I remember correctly, this was the offseason you guys traded for Kyrie Irving as well. And signed Gordon Hayward.
Yeah.
Got Al Horford the year before. Like Danny was in his bag these few years.
Yeah. So he did a great job these few years. Yeah.
So if you get that call and you're Colangelo and you're a rival GM, if Danny Ainge was the Celtics GM and called Daryl Morey when he was the Sixers GM and said this, would Daryl Morey not be like, why the fuck is Danny Ainge willing to trade back 2 spots? Like, what is he seeing that we're not seeing? Now, I'm not saying you should have drafted Jason Tatum. I think it's hindsight bias to say
Tatum. Yeah, it totally is, by the way.
To move up and take Jason Tatum with the first pick. But like you said, if they stayed there, they were going to take Tatum no matter what. Like
the bad process is like you have to be sure about a guy if you're trading up. Like I don't even blame you so much for like being in love with Markelle Fultz, but like why trade up if you're not getting the workout? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, get the workout and then trade up, or
exactly
like, make that happen somehow. Like,
and if his camp is refusing to do so, why? Like, because that should also set off alarm bells in your head. And the thing is that as a prospect, it was undeniable how great Fultz was. Like, he was amazing.
He was amazing. Like, people don't understand. Like in college, he was like a smooth. It's insane. Go back and watch. He was a smooth shooter who could like get downhill. He could create his own shot like anywhere. I was so happy that the Celtics, that I was going nuts that the draft lottery night. I was like, yes, we finally got a fucking guy. Like, let's fucking go.
Yep.
And then we traded back for Jason Tatum, who I was sure was like bad Carmelo Anthony. I was so mad. I was so mad.
And you were right.
I mean, I guess I was correct about that, but like,
he's not bad.
It worked out. He's a better passer. He's good at all the things. He's a much worse scorer than Carmelo Anthony, but he's better at literally every other facet.
Much worse. Effectively, aesthetically less pleasing doesn't mean much worse.
I guess that's true.
So Fultz is the pick here. I mean, like you said, when I went through this exercise and I read through all of these like picks, like you can't really like destroy a team for missing on the 12th pick in the draft. It's hard to do unless there's like a uniquely shitty scenario that kind of puts them in that position. But the first 2 picks in the draft are just the most important time for a team that can really change the outcome of your franchise for the next 10 years. And both of these teams with the Kings and the Sixers just completely fucking whiffed.
Yeah.
And to have this, and honestly, never mind. I was going to say, it's actually the Celtics had at the time, it seemed like the picks that they were acquiring outside of these Nets picks, the Nets and the Grizzlies picks that they got in 2019 and 2020, I think, if I remember correctly. Those are the years you got them.
For the picks The Grizzlies pick was a Jeff Green trade, and then we had the Kings pick from this Fultz trade, were like the other extra ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the next year that pick became Romeo Langford, the 1 year that the Kings were actually competitive in this really shitty window. And then 2 years later, it was actually the Grizzlies pick was top 3 protected, I think, and they jumped up in the lottery where they got John Morant. Yeah. And then after that, you guys in 2020 had the 14th pick, and you used that on Aaron Nesmith. The reason that I say this is that it could have been so much worse from a Sixers fan perspective, where like if you had just stayed in the 2018 draft and drafted Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, if the Memphis Grizzlies or the Kings weren't randomly bad or good in one season, you could have gotten more cracks at getting younger guys, is what I'm saying. Like the window, like I think your guys' window is still fairly long, because considering that like how good the Jays were right away and how competitive you guys have been. But like we could have been looking at like 10 to 15 years of just the Celtics like possibly winning the championship every single year if you had drafted one of those other guys.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's the Nesmith pick is the huge sliding doors moment, because it was Maxey, because that was like that's one where it's fair to critique because everyone wanted Maxey at that point. Like,
Maxey in 2020, and then 2018 it was you traded that pick for Kyrie, which to be fair was a good trade at the time. Like anyone would have traded a top 10 pick in the draft for Kyrie a year in advance.
Yeah, but Shai was on the board, you know.
But Shai being on the board, and then reportedly later, I mean, it is the bastard Danny Ainge. So
Danny Ainge lies about all this stuff.
And all these GMs, I love this player, whatever. But you did get reports that like he loved LaMelo Ball, he loved SGA, he loved these guys that like. And I think the LaMelo Ball reports were actually legit, because the 2020 draft, if I remember correctly, you guys were trying to trade Smart at the time and tried to get up to the Warriors pick, so you could take LaMelo Ball. But you know, obviously, injuries have kind of derailed his career as well. So maybe that actually worked out better for you guys that didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my take on this, the reason that this is not in contention for number 1 pick, my cope as a Sixers fan would be exactly what you're just saying. That like. Honestly, it really is the same as if they had stayed in the same place and drafted Fultz at 3, though. Like if the Celtics had drafted Tatum number 1 overall, it's basically the same thing, because like that pick you sent out, here's that zone, the Romeo Langford zone, because Tyler Herro goes the pick before. Sekou Doumbouya, Chuma Okeke.
Out of the league.
Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's good, but
he's on his third
bounce around. Yep, had to bounce around a little.
Yeah.
Goga, who's like not really been around, and then Luka Samanic, like
that was a very, very bad range for the 2019 draft. So that's the only cope that I can have. Yeah. You trade away the pick that becomes Romeo Langford in a bad range of the draft. And then on top of that, you get extremely lucky that pick that you traded for Marquel Fultz somehow turned into Tyrese Maxey. Like the fact that Joel Embiid is not already on another team is incredible when you think about all this shit.
Hold on though, Trill. I'm about to break your heart, because if you go a little bit further, you expand the range one more pick. Can you imagine what the Sixers would have looked like if they had managed to get Matisse Thybulle on the team?
Oh my God.
A big what if.
Huge what if. Historic what if. What if Thybulle was drafted by the Sixers?
Instead, as we know, he was drafted by the Celtics, and Grant Williams was drafted by the Sixers, and you guys got Carson Edwards too. So
I mean, a dynasty would have occurred if we were able to hold on to Matisse Thybulle on 2019 draft night. So
I mean, the Fultz one is one of the all-time greats. Like, the more I think about it, it is kind of worth cope, because I've never seen a guy's brain just like break in that way. Because he was actually good, unlike Marvin Bagley and some of these other guys we're talking about.
We're going to talk more about weird shit that's happened to the Sixers over the last 10 years later in this draft. But the stretch from 2015 to 2018 draft is a historical how did this happen thing, just to one franchise over and over and over again. And someone tweeted at me earlier, and they were like, are they all going to be Sixers picks? And I was like, outside of those years, we actually didn't do terrible in the draft. Like
there's one more Sixers pick I'm thinking about.
Do you want to take them now? Third pick?
No,
okay.
No, not now. We'll get there though.
Okay. I have some spicy ones that I might end up using earlier, even though they're not quite as bad as some obviously other ones. But your third pick.
I'm gonna get accused of pandering with this pick.
No.
Yeah. I'm just saying, damage wise. Jabari Parker getting drafted by the Bucks is pretty fucking bad.
I had it pretty high on my list, and here's why.
I had it too.
Here's why.
Yeah.
To have, and it's easy to say this now because Embiid is healthy, but to have Giannis, Middleton, and Embiid for a decade. Middleton was already on the team too.
Yeah.
And Giannis wasn't that good yet. They obviously didn't hit with their next few picks. 2015 draft, they missed. They took Thon Maker, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But they would have had another shot the next year because Embiid missed his first year. But the only thing is, the Embiid thing is so hard because is there any other team that wouldn't have just traded Embiid? Because the Sixers were in the unique position that they were trying to tank, and Hinkie didn't give a fuck. So if the Bucks draft Embiid and he misses his first 2 seasons, do they just trade him and this doesn't matter at all? That's the cope I would say if I were, and they are also won a title, obviously. So they hard.
It's kind of hard to imagine what would have happened if the Bucks had drafted a front court player who had really disastrous injuries his first 2 years in the league. It's literally what happened with Parker. Like his knee exploded. His knee exploded too, and they didn't trade him. So
that's true.
You know, like I think it.
How long was he on the Bucks? 4 years?
I think he
hit
contract. Yeah,
I think he hit
signed him. I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hometown team. I remember that spawned the famous quote. They ain't paying me $20 million a year to play defense.
Yeah. That's such a red flag. That was such a red flag.
Yeah.
Man. I'm thinking that's why I was so scared of Jason Tatum, because he was also like an front court guy, like at Duke. And like, I don't know.
I do remember him getting Jabari-ish. Like, I think you might have been the one that had said this before, but Jabari at the time,
I liked him more than Wiggins. I was
going to say,
yeah,
Wiggins, Jabari, Embiid, top 3 was expected to be like a extremely good top 3.
Yeah,
like
I was an Embiid. I will say I had that right. I was an Embiid guy. I said Embiid number 1. I thought if the Celtics. Because the Celtics had really shitty lottery luck that year, but they were like in the mix to jump up there. I really wanted them to get Embiid coming out of that draft, and they didn't, obviously. So
Bill probably had the best workout he's ever seen in person.
Yes, amazing.
And looking back at that draft, 2014. So I do just think this is a testament to how good Giannis is, and to a lesser extent Middleton. That they missed, because like the Sixers always get shit for missing on their draft picks for the process, which I understand because they intentionally tanked or whatever. Yeah. But like the Bucks missed on the Jabari pick, they missed on Thon Maker a year later. They did get Brogdon in the second round of 2016, but they've really not hit on any picks outside of Giannis, like majorly hit on picks since Giannis. But that's how good Giannis is.
They drafted Tyler Ennis, OJ Mayo. God, I'm forgetting all of these cursed Bucks picks. God damn.
They've low key been the worst drafting team. Like, if it weren't for this outlier 15th, amazing, one of the greatest players of all time, taken with the 15th pick, and then also credit to them trading for Chris Middleton after his rookie season, and then him turning into an all-star. Like, it is a weird kind of out there lucky, but also if this didn't happen, the Bucks would be like on a Kings level laughing stock. Like, the Giannis saved them from complete irrelevance. When you look at the history, and the Jabari pick is like a very obvious one. Not only was he injured, but also he was just kind of an empty calories guy when he was healthy. Even like, I know he has defenders and stuff. And they're like, well, if he never got injured, but like, it's really hard for me to imagine a defenseless wing being like hyper effective. That's like so offensively tilted, needs the ball to be effective, is not a playmaking hub in the same way that like you talked about Tatum. Like, Tatum's become such an improved playmaker. Like, all these guys had to become either like Paul George is a great defender and a great off the catch shooter. Jimmy Butler's became an amazing playmaker over time. Tatum's become these wings that are successful are all you're either a role player or you become really good at playmaking or defense. And Jabari just never had that in his bag. Like, he was just a bucket.
Yeah, or both. Like honestly, most of the good wings are good at both. Like Jimmy Butler and Tatum. Like they're both plus defenders, both plus playmakers. Like Paul George is kind of the rare outlier where his shooting is so good that he can just do defense. He doesn't really need the playmaking as much. So I don't. The thing that's also so damning about the Jabari Parker thing, and the reason it's not Andrew Wiggins is not the pick here, because I might make the argument Andrew Wiggins was more damaging in that he played just well enough to get a max contract for the team and then get paid.
They at least didn't make the mistake of doing that with Jabari. Yeah.
So I might make that argument, but the fact is that the Cavs were really just drafting him to trade him for Kevin Love because they knew they were getting LeBron back at that point.
So the Cavs drafted him to trade him, so that the pick itself worked out for the Cavs because they got Kevin Love. And then the pick for Minnesota, now look, was it a tough few years and was, giving him a max contract a disaster? Absolutely. Yeah. But also kind of just being in the shitter for so long with Minnesota, they got so many cracks at the back of the top of the draft that eventually they landed with 2 number 1 picks. And once again, it all requires a little bit of luck. But they got Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, and they have redirected the ship to be back on a normal trajectory and the best trajectory that they've ever had as a franchise.
Yeah. And Cat's like a pretty middle of the road number 1 pick too. Like you didn't get the number 1 pick in one of these weird years, like a DeAndre Ayton year, or, you didn't have that pick. You know what I'm saying? They've done that. It's funny. The Wolves have actually done like some of their worst work, like the recent Wolves, like kind of in the end of the draft. They just can't nail for the longest time before Conley. They couldn't nail there's a lot of Justin Pattons in the Wolves' recent history, which is what really kind of held them back. So. And some dumb trades too. But anyway, that's why Jabari Parker is the pick here. Obviously missing on Embiid is like pretty bad, but like there's a lot of other this was also a pretty good draft. Yeah. Like Marcus.
Hold on. Let me, if I remember correctly, Embiid, Marcus Smart, Aaron Gordon. The only one that missed from that range was Exum, really, because Julius Randle was like the 7th pick too, if I remember correctly.
Yes, Julius Randle was 7. Yeah, Exum was 5. Yeah. Then you do have a 8-9 stinker of Stauskas, Valenlay. Actually, it does get pretty bad.
Those guys weren't ever going to go in the top 3 range, though. The only reason why the Parker thing is tough is because we would have walked away with at least a starter level player. Yeah,
everyone but Exum at the next tier was a starter, was an NBA starter at least. Like Aaron Gordon and Marcus Smart are these starters that are actually like hyper good role players for contenders. Randall is a 2-time All NBA player somehow. So like, can't really argue with that.
He is on the 3rd team, though. That's the thing.
That's true.
And also, I can't imagine a worse context than going to Giannis's team. Both Randall and Giannis. Like, those two would have just not fit at all together. Although I was extremely Julius Randle pilled in that draft because I didn't understand in 2014 why his transition to the NBA wouldn't be as smooth because he just was a weird bully ball kind of big in college. And historically speaking, those guys kind of tend to dominate lower levels and not really pan out, but Randall figured his way out. Like Randall's become a very good, productive NBA player, and it took him 3 teams and it took him like 5 years, but he at least became, like he's made all-star teams. He's made all NBA teams. Like undeniably would have been a fine pick if you take him in the top 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's really brutal to draft a guy that you don't give a second contract to when a league MVP is the next pick, and it's totally feasible for you to draft him there.
The Giannis and Embiid fit would have been clunky to start because you were in the era of Steph and the Warriors, where like spacing was everything. It's not to say that spacing isn't important, but guys have gotten so much better at shooting over time. But the argument that you could have made back if they did hold on to Embiid is, would Embiid have just been like, you're going to be shooting more threes from the jump of your career? Joel started shooting more threes and got more effective as a 3-point shooter a little bit later to help out Ben Simmons. And which is funny enough, like he worked on that shot and extended his range, because Embiid is another guy where like he showed a lot of touch on hook shots and like inside,
but he was an unreal prospect, man. Like he was so good. Like anytime you watch Kansas, That was the thing about Kansas that year for me was every time I watched Kansas, I wasn't watching fucking Andrew Wiggins. I was watching Joel Embiid. He was so good. He was amazing. God.
And the other thing about Embiid from that is that there's an argument to be made that if he didn't get hurt, like we talk about his injuries now, he got hurt twice before he played in the NBA. So like if he never got hurt, we're talking about, like, obviously this is in a fantasy world that will never exist, but like, I'm just imagining a world where you get Embiid and Giannis with Embiid with less injuries.
Yes.
Like they would have figured it out. Like it
would have been fine. Yeah.
I think at a certain point you're just too much overwhelming talent that you can figure out how to make that work, even if it isn't a hand and glove fit because of their skill sets. And just at least early the lack of shooting and touch. But yeah, so all right. I had Jabari very high on my board, so I'm glad that you ended up taking that one. I'm working on finding out whether Brook Lopez is a better shooter in his career than Joel Embiid. But so here's the thing. I will tell you this much about Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez will have the volume now that Joel doesn't, because he still shoots way more threes. Yeah. But if you look at Joel's catch and shoot threes over the last few years, Joel could easily up his volume and be a Brook Lopez level volume shooter. Like, I think that's kind of the pathway for him for the rest of his career, to be honest with you, to stay kind of relevant. We've joked about like making him into like a super Brook Lopez, but
I think it's possible. I also think it's possible that so Joel's a 34% career 3-point shooter and Brook is a 34% career NBA. It's 34.9 versus 34.1. So 1 percentage point better. It would have been fine.
Yeah. I think it would have been total. I think they would have figured it out and they would have dominated the East for years. So, but yeah. So anyway,
I can't be the only one who thinks if the Milwaukee Bucks had drafted Joel Embiid, put together a team that would dominate the NBA.
Am I wrong? Can't say I'm wrong.
I would have been so mad as a Celtics fan. My Isaiah Thomas little engine that could Celtics teams would have gotten smushed so bad.
Well, Embiid, if Embiid could stay healthy, which is always the thing. All right. So should I go with an obvious pick or should I go with a spicy one?
Up to you. I have my list set. I'm gonna go by my list.
All right. Stop. This is more just pandering a little bit to the audience here.
Okay. Good. Let's go.
I think this one is, and pandering to you specifically. This is not, to be clear here, this is not one of the worst picks of the last decade in terms of the player who was drafted is not a bad player. Well, he might be. I'm going to go with Tyler Herro.
Let's go. Just in terms of damage to the team. Okay, I like this. Hear argument.
Me out.
I like this argument.
Hear me out.
Going. Okay.
So Tyler Herro was very obviously the best player on the board in his range.
Yeah.
Would the Miami Heat have been better off drafting a bust? Because he's the rare pick where he actually had good, productive NBA seasons as a young player. But it's the Wiggins thing you just talked about where he gets the max contract.
Yes.
And if you told me after his rookie season that we would be talking about the fact that he's on an untradeable contract, basically, they couldn't maximize the Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo window because they cannot trade him. Damian Lillard was available for trade. They couldn't trade for him. There were other stars that they could have potentially traded for if it weren't for them taking Tyler Herro, him overperforming his first year or two in the league, winning Sixth Man of the Year, having his bubble run, and then getting a $30 million a year contract that they cannot trade. And effectively, like, this is a team that has made it to the NBA Finals 2 times, 1 time without him. He has been a disaster in the playoffs. They have been better every time he gets hurt in the playoffs. And you could potentially be looking at a scenario where this is why there's another factor of this. A year later, they drafted Precious Achiuwa 1 pick ahead of Tyrese Maxey because they already had Tyler Herro.
Yeah.
And we thought they were going to take him, but they were like, we don't want to draft another fucking combo guard who's undersized. And Herro was coming off the bubble, so they were like, we're not going to draft. Like,
You're cooking.
They didn't draft for best player available. If they had just went that direction and possibly taken Tyrese Maxey the next year in the 2020 draft, I'm just saying, I think they would have been way better off. They would have had a trade chip in Maxey to trade for whatever star became available. They would have not had to give Herro this contract. And they would be even more dangerous than they are right now. Like, the thing is that the Heat will always be a pain in the ass. They'll always be competitive, and they'll always be in that contendership because they made the conference finals, they made the finals. When in reality, unless there's a serious injury, they have zero chance to win those NBA finals because they just get to a point where they don't have enough talent. Like, they have enough competitive grind and good players to get to that point, but they can never get over the top. And Herro is the main piece blocking that.
Yeah, we just read off all of the guys who went after that, and they were all pretty bad. You know, your Romeo Langford, Sekou Doumbouya, Tumo, Kiki, whatever. But you drop down a tier. These were guys who absolutely could have gotten drafted in this range. The 3 picks after those guys we just listed out were Matisse Thybulle, Brandon Clark, and Grant Williams.
But what I'm saying is,
all of those guys could have been fine for the Miami Heat.
But what I'm saying is that what if they just drafted Sekou Doumbouya and then by his 3rd year he was just off the team?
Yeah.
But they still could have been potentially drafting Tyrese Maxey the next year
true.
And also just making trades. Like, would it suck to miss on the pick? Yes, but no one would have blamed you, and you would have not ended up in the current situation that you're in. So
I'm going galaxy brain. So if Tyler Herro doesn't have the bubble 30-point game, right?
Yeah.
Does that mean, and he's not there to like buoy the offense? Does that mean that? Yeah, I guess yeah. They definitely could have ended up picking Maxey, or do they end up drafting Cole Anthony because they're like a couple picks higher?
It's also It's also possible that is the case.
Yeah.
Although because it's regular season record, right?
But Tyler Herro was doing pretty well in the regular season still.
He was good. He actually had a game winner against the Sixers that season, I remember. And like literally won them a game in that season, I remember. But there is the butterfly effect thing of like, what if they're slightly worse the next year because Herro was like kind of effective as a rookie? There's always that. But just what we know now, like they could have taken Maxey. Honestly, another guy, just real quick, I know for a fact, I'm almost positive that that Desmond Bane pre-draft was working out in Miami. It's easy for us to say this now. I did love both of those guys in the draft, though. You can go on my Twitter and you can see that I also love Cole Anthony in that draft. So I love all 3 of those guys.
Yeah.
But it's not complete hindsight bias for me to say that if I were the Miami Heat, I would have selected one of Tyrese Maxey or Desmond Bane with that pick. Yeah. And Desmond Bane would have been a beast on the Miami Heat, dude. God. Like, he would have been great, too.
I would have been so fucking mad.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I would have fucking hated him. That would have been awful. That's a good one. You cooked there. That's exactly the kind of thing I was looking for, and I can't believe
I was putting the pieces together, and I was like, this is kind of this is a damaging pick, despite being, if you did a redraft, he would still go top 10. Like, he was above projected value for the 14th pick in the draft. And in a bad draft, you take whatever you can get, but the rare guy that actually hurts the team in the long run, that is a positive pick at the time. So yeah, Tyler Herro.
All right. Are you ready for me to cook?
Yes.
In return.
Let's go.
I thought I was getting loopy with this one, but okay. So there's a very obvious one in the 2020 NBA draft. Okay. You've got a really good team that's returning to power. They have a chance with this top pick to totally change their destiny, and they absolutely blow it. I, of course, am talking about the Phoenix Suns selecting Jaylen Smith, number 10 overall.
Had him on my list.
So let's go through this, okay? Because also Denny Avdija, by the way, the pick right before this.
Denny Avdija was the 9th pick?
Yes, it was the 9th
Okay,
pick.
so if I remember correctly, it goes Denny Avdija, Jaylen Smith, Devin Vassell, and then Tyrese Halliburton, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. That's bad.
That's pretty bad. The thing is, like, it's almost this range. It's literally after Killian Hayes. Besides Kira Lewis, it's like literally impossible to miss in this range. Like, Denny 9, Jaylen Smith 10, Devin Vassell 11, Tyrese 12, Kira's 13, as we said. Aaron Nesmith, who's turned into a fine player, 14.
Fine,
Cole
yeah.
Anthony, 15. Isaiah Stewart, 16, fine player. Poku is also a miss, 17. Then you have Josh Green, Sadiq Bey, Precious Achua, Tyrese Maxey.
It's insane in retrospect to think that people thought this was the worst draft since 2013.
It's
Because not
crazy.
only does it have the top end talent, the depth isn't bad either. Like,
No,
there are guys.
After Maxey, there's a little 3-player dip of Najee, Bolmero, and RJ Hampton. But then you go back to quickly Peyton Pritchard, McDaniels, Malachi Flynn, who 50-point scorer, Malachi Flynn, Desmond Bain, and then you have like
the best guard on the Spurs, Malachi Flynn,
and you have like Xavier Tillman at like 35, and Nick Richards at 42. Like and Isaiah Joe at 49.
I was gonna say Isaiah Joe and Paul Reed were also at the end of that. Yeah.
Paul Reed's 58. So it's like it's the fact of getting Jaylen Smith, who is like been pretty much a zero in the NBA. Like I guess he's like technically a rotation center.
He got an MLE contract. Good for him.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like he's technically like a replacement level like center, but like Tyrese Halliburton's on the board. Devin Vassell, who's like, again, I make fun of Devin Vassell and nerds.
Would have been a great pick with the 10th pick,
but he would have been, especially for the Suns, man.
Yeah.
Like that would have been amazing to like pair with Mikal Bridges. Like they could have really used that. Even if they had ended up with like Cole Anthony or Isaiah Stewart, like that could have like changed something for the Suns, like quite a bit. Like given where they
wouldn't
were
have been forced into the panic moves that they were forced into a few years later.
Yes, given where they were in their title window, like it could have. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is you get these once Chris Paul is too old to be effective, they start panicking and they do the Durant move, they do the Bradley Beal move, and all of these compounding things that fuck them up beyond all repair. And this is the one they like really fucked up on in the era of the Suns like resurgence and them being competitive. Like this is the one that like really broke them, and it like they really needed a player here and they just didn't get a player in a draft where it was really easy to at least get a player. Like they didn't need to get Maxey or Halliburton. They could have just got a normal guy and it would have been fine. Like
they got too high on their own supply because the year before they drafted Cam Johnson, everyone said it was a reach, even though Cam Johnson was a totally fine pick where he went.
Yeah.
And they said, we can do it again. And Jaylen Johnson was projected to go from 25 to 35 in that draft. They could have easily traded back. They could have easily just gotten a pick later in the late first, early second, and made the Jaylen Smith pick if they really liked him that much. The worst part about this to me is the fact that they didn't even pick up the third year in his contract. They were not patient at all with Jaylen Smith. Like, it's not to say that Jaylen Smith would have made a difference for them, but if you're going to make this pick, you have to be patient with this player. You can't just be like, all right, we're all in by a second year. Keep in mind, your third year option is after your rookie season. So after his rookie season, they said, we've seen enough.
Yeah, that's very rare.
Very, very rare. Like Johnny Davis got his third year option picked up. So for them to turn around and do that and then effectively make it so that his trade value was nothing, they had to turn around and trade him for Torrey Craig, who actually turned out to be a kind of a decent player for them. I think he played for them 2 different times, if I remember correctly. That was the one thing. At least you got some rotation player, even if he wasn't a long-standing rotation player for you. But long story short on this, yeah, I mean, it's just so obvious. It was obvious at the time that Tyrese Halliburton shouldn't have fell. But just think about all of these guys that the Suns have had chances to draft, that even though they made the finals, they've won 60 games in another season, the Devin Booker window could have been so much better. Yeah. They had so many opportunities. They had so many cracks because Booker was the late developing guy who was on shit teams early, really popped at like 23 in his like 5th season in the NBA, 6th season in the NBA. And that gave them the opportunity to have all of these bites at the apple. And they fucked it up so many times. There are other bigger name busts on here that we haven't even gotten to that are probably they're almost definitely worse picks than this, But just to think about if they were able to just get Halliburton here and have Chris Paul mentor him until he was washed, and then he steps into the Chris Paul role.
Yeah,
the best backcourt in the Western Conference outside of that might be it.
Yeah.
I don't. It's so synergistic.
I think people underestimate how damaging this isn't like a sexy one. You know, I think there's probably one or two in people's minds that they definitely would have picked ahead of this.
Yeah.
I would argue that this is more damaging to where the Suns were as a team at that point in time than some of these other teams in terms of like how bad it would hurt them. So anyway, that's my pick.
Very, very tough. So I have the third-year option not being picked up just always blows my mind.
Yeah.
Like it's just so
rare that happens.
So
you've got to be terrible. You've got to be terrible for that. I think that happened to Anthony Bennett, for example.
Yep. All right, so we went with some spicy ones. Let's get the James Wiseman one out of the way.
That was the other one I was thinking about.
Let's get the James Wiseman.
I wanted to do the bit, but
yeah, I mean we did two just for us picks.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the real like franchise damaging picks, and we've kind of talked.
I have an argument. I have a counter argument to make about this, but you go first. You lay out the facts. I'll make a counter argument about the.
Here are the facts. James Wiseman played 3 games in college. He was always seen as an upside prospect that would take a while, and he was drafted to a team that was directly in the middle of a championship window. They take him. They basically move heaven and earth to try to make him work on the Warriors, and it never works. He gets injured. They win a title. Great. But at the time, Bill Simmons was saying this was their James Worthy moment where the Lakers had a chance in the middle of their championship window to re-up. They take James Worthy, and it takes their window from by the time that Kareem is washed, they're still contending for championships because they hit on the James Worthy pick. So the fact that they had that right in the middle of their championship window extended things. And even though they win that title, there were obviously better options on the board for them than James Wiseman, who they eventually turned into Gary Payton II, who has barely played for them since he's come back to the team a few years later. Look, Wiseman is now on his 3rd team. He's a veteran minimum guy, didn't get a second contract. And you can say, this is why I think a lot of the times you just have to not really give a fuck about what consensus says. I talked about the best player available versus fit thing. The consensus would say you can't draft Tyrese Halliburton this high. LaMelo Ball was really the guy that everyone suspected them to take with the 2nd pick at the time. And really, in retrospect, it's easy for me to say you should have just taken Halliburton. But Bob Myers has come out and said, we interviewed him. We thought he was amazing. We thought he would have been a great fit. We loved everything about him. And, you could have traded down and still gotten him. It's one of those things where the only reason why I think people would give this a pass, and I think what you're about to say is LaMelo's gotten hurt all these years. And then you had Patrick Williams, who's whatever, Okoro, who's whatever. And this draft didn't really get into Kongwu and Killian Hayes. This draft really didn't get good again until a few picks later. It was the end of the lottery into the 20s when this draft got really good. But just to imagine the Warriors where they're in a position now where Steph wouldn't have to put putting pressure on the front office to make moves. Their window would have been extended greatly in terms of you go from that 2-year window that they had and they won the title in 2022 to a 5 or 6 year window if you draft Halliburton or LaMelo. It just seems like they whiffed on a perfect opportunity to kind of keep Steph happy, keep the team in championship contention, potentially win more than just one championship. And they got a guy who really had no effect on their championship window.
Yeah. I mean, my thing is that I think that this is less a sin of draft picks and more of a sin of front office. And you want to talk about high on your own supply and being not understanding where the juice of your franchise comes from. Bob Myers is I really think Bob Myers is high key like one of the worst NBA GMs who like people think is good. Like quietly, he's kind of during the end of his run, he was every bit as bad as Masai's been like these last few years. Like, and I think the pivot to the 2 timelines thing was just a horrible miscalculation on his point. And even if
also just quick, what you talked about, what really makes your franchise go?
Yeah.
Drafting the toolsy big guy is never a thing that the Warriors should be trying to do.
No, never. It never.
Like you draft the Trace Jackson Davis, Brandon Podziemski kind of guys as opposed to the James Wisemans.
Yeah. That's not your you didn't get where you are drafting DeAndre Ayton. Like that's not your thing. Like, and but even then, like, because the obvious thing, LaMelo Ball probably would have worked out, like, whatever. Like, maybe you don't want to reach for Halliburton and then you look dumb. Understandable. How about this? How about you try to trade for Jimmy fucking Butler or fucking I think like Paul George was off the table and like a lot of these guys were off the table. There was somebody. How about you try to make a fucking trade for a guy who's ready to play right now with your number 2 overall pick instead of getting fucking cute and trying to. You have the best player in the world. You have this team of not guys who aren't that old, who just through sheer dumb injuries, really like acts of God in terms of what happened to Klay Thompson and then what happened to Steph. You end up back down your thing and you're like, nope, actually, me, Bob Myers, the guy who didn't draft Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, I'm the guy. I'm so good at drafting that I need these picks to reset the franchise. And then you draft fucking Moses Moody and Kuminga and who's fine, but like is not a world beater at the number 7 pick in any like he's a fine number 7 pick. And then Wiseman. Like this is a horrible misunderstanding of philosophy from his perspective. And again, malpractice from Bob Myers. He got us to get down on his knees and thank God every day that Steph dropped that extra championship in his lap. Because if they didn't have that championship, everyone would know what a fucking fraud he is, and he wouldn't have that cushy NBA job. He is the biggest poser and Steph Curry merchant of all time. Low-key terrible GM. Fuck you, Bob Myers. That's why it's not that's why this trade isn't as bad for me, because it's less about who you actually drafted in that part, but the fact that you were drafting at all. It's more of a GM issue than it is an actual using, you know what I'm saying, than it is who you actually picked with the pick.
So the cope that I hear from Warriors fans is similar to what the Pistons fans would say in 2004, which is that if we took a player who was more plug and play, like Halliburton, or even like LaMelo Ball or whoever, if we took a good player with that pick, then it might have changed the way that we play. And like maybe Halliburton and LaMelo just aren't good enough defensively to play in like the NBA Finals, for example. But also Jordan Poole did play in the NBA Finals. I just want to point that out. The kid was like fine.
Sure.
But they say that, okay, if you had drafted Melo or whoever for not LaMelo, Carmelo Anthony for the Pistons back in the day, what everyone wanted them to do. People will tell you, Wade, now it was Carmelo that everyone wanted them to draft because Carmelo was coming off of being the best player on a national championship team, was clearly the second best prospect at the time in that draft behind LeBron James. And they took Darko on this idea player, which is very similar to the James Wiseman thing, where it's like the idea of what this guy can become as opposed to actually being good at basketball. But the fact that Wiseman was bad and then got hurt might have helped them. Their over-under on championships, they might have hit that over just because they didn't have to play such a young player. They didn't have to integrate him into their system and do all that shit. He was just a non-factor for them for 2 years, which helped them win that championship. But it also lowered their 5 to 6 year window, like we talked about, where in terms of just being competitive and hoping that you could win a championship, if they had drafted one of those other guys, they still would have been in that competitive window. it might not got high enough for them to win a championship, but they would have had 5 or 6 shots at it. So that's the cope you can tell yourself if you're a Warriors fan. It worked out for the best. You got Steph's 4th championship. You got him the Finals MVP. Just more by dumb luck than anything else. Yeah. But that is the cope that you can tell yourself if you are a Warriors fan. And honestly, I liked the Moses Moody pick at the time, so I can't even say shit. I thought that there were much worse picks in that draft. But honestly, even if they had just not had the 2020 pick or the 2020 draft and the 2021 draft back-to-back being so bad, I think they would have come out on the other side and been fine. Because they got 3 chances in the lottery. And to come out of that with maybe one good player in Jonathan Kuminga that really makes a difference. And like, even if I liked Moses Moody as a prospect, like the idea of him was always going to be like 4th or 5th guy. If they had come out of that next draft with one of Şengün or Franz, we would have felt even more fine about the Wiseman pick. But because they whiffed so badly on 3 straight picks, to be sitting here now and knowing that they could have extended their championship window, and now like I think we're going to get to the point where Steph starts looking around. Like I think this team's going to be better this year, but we would have never even had a question about Steph retiring as a Warrior if they had just nailed one of these 3 picks to like the potential that they could really be. And now they don't want to give Jonathan Kuminga a second contract too. So we'll see how that works out.
I mean, honestly, I think the new regime has done a good job with what they inherited.
Yeah, no, I agree.
This goes back to Bob Myers just like totally misunderstanding everything and like really overplaying his hand and getting greedy. I mean, it's kind of happened to Danny Ainge too. Like they tried to zig and zag with the Gordon Hayward and given some of that as an act of God with Gordon Hayward like breaking his ankle and then Kyrie, I don't know, deciding he wanted out, like doing a Kyrie thing, but like same thing, like just pick a direction, and they picked the wrong one. So I don't think I don't think the Wiseman pick is necessarily bad. I think the decision to actually make that pick is certifiably insane if you're not certain of what you're getting there. So
yeah, I think the Wiseman pick is bad. So all right. Once again, I'm looking through and I'm talking about like there are individual picks that are like, for example, I could take Josh Jackson right now. Terrible pick. Mm-hmm. Josh Jackson, was a really bad pick. There are so many guys I could take from here, but if I want to get a little bit more creative with it, because that's kind of what the juice is here, I'm going to go a 2-for-1 here.
Okay.
And once again, we're talking about longer term. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's your pick. I forgot. I picked Wiseman. Damn it.
Okay. Well, mine will be quick because now we're picking Ayton.
Okay, so you want to go Ayton for all the reasons we discussed earlier?
Yeah, all the reasons we discussed earlier. Now it's Ayton. I mean, terrible fucking pick. More defensible than the Marvin Bagley one, but still bad.
Gave him a second contract, the max deal. Ended up having to trade him for a bad contract in Nurkic. And then, by the way, we haven't talked about Grayson Allen at all. I know you were fine with them extending him, but we were like, it's so much money in tax.
It's so much money, yeah.
Yeah, it's so much money, but like, seeing the kind of players who got fucking jobs this offseason in terms of like guys that didn't get real contracts, like Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah.
And like Lonnie Walker's still a free agent. And like Malik Beasley got like $5 million. And like these guys, and now Grayson Allen's better than these guys, but like not like I make $18 million a year and they make nothing.
It's gonna be a Duncan Robinson contract, like where I think it's gonna be like bad, like it could be like very bad next year, and then it'll like swing back to being good or fine if he's good at shooting. Like I think it's gonna be like a Duncan Robinson style contract like that.
But still, like to not see where the league is going, and be like we can't lose them, and it's like sometimes you can though. Like once again, it's Grayson Allen. Like it's not. You're not losing Mikal Bridges. Like.
Well, the thing is that they literally can't, though. I mean, given what you're just saying, like some guys got minimums. Like it is a broader minimum class than it usually is, but that's literally all the Suns can do are minimums, like for the foreseeable future now. So,
yeah, I mean, they did it because they want to be able to trade it, but now can they trade it?
No. I mean,
so they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't.
Yeah, I think it's fine because if you're okay with paying an insane amount of money, like if you're okay with basically paying cat money to have Grayson Allen on your team, I guess it's
Paying the
fine.
GDP of a small country to the 100th best player in the NBA, the
Yeah.
112th best player in the NBA, or whatever. Like,
By the way, Trillin, I know that he makes $18 million. It's just with the luxury taxes and everything.
Yeah.
And he ends up being effectively a $60 million player with like $40 million of that going to like other teams. So it's
the ripple effects that the Ayton pick had on this franchise in terms of,
oh god, and Jaylen Smith, who we've talked about. Like,
but I just want to say
yeah.
with the Ayton pick, you give him the second contract because you don't want to lose him for nothing.
Yeah.
Which I actually understood that one a little bit more at the time because Ayton was like a good, effective player for them at one point. And like, yeah, losing a guy that is that good, I understand not wanting to just let him walk for nothing, especially when you have nothing to kind of replenish what's going on with your team. But to have to take on the Nurkic contract to get off of Ayton's contract, to have to trade for Grayson Allen, who had a good season for you, and then overpay him to keep him, pay a crazy amount of luxury tax dollars. And also, by the way, you also patched on Luka Doncic, who's one of the 3 best players in the NBA and a historically good offensive player.
Also a historically good, like these are in my lifetime, these are the best like prospects of like the last like 30 years. Okay. It's LeBron, obviously. Then I think it was Zion. I would probably make an argument for Zion. Mm-hmm. And then it was probably Durant and Odin. Then I think you get into it's Anthony Davis or Luka Doncic after that. You're talking about a top 5 or no, sorry, Wemby. And then Anthony Davis.
Top 7 or 8 prospect, even before the draft, we knew that he was that dude.
Yes, like he was. That's how good Luka was. Like everyone who knew anything about the draft, it was every bit the same as like a Zion, Anthony Davis, Wemby, where it was like a foregone conclusion. And for whatever reason, 2 teams passed on him, which is 3 teams actually, which is insane. Like
it is really funny to see like how big obsessed teams were even up until 2018 with like Ayton and then Wiseman a few years later in 2020.
Yeah.
But now we look at the bigs that go at the top of the draft and they're like guards. Like, like Chet and Wemby and like guys that are just like, and I guess that is the thing that you're always looking for. Like, yes, you want size and skill, but you also want them to be able to have these star qualities that even Ayton at his best probably was never going to have those star level qualities in terms of like the comp that people always made for him was like, could he be like David Robinson? And it's like, I mean, David Robinson is like an all-time tough shot maker. Like, I mean, Embiid is closer to a David Robinson than Ayton was as a prospect. Like Ayton, like I said, I can understand the justification for the Ayton pick because of his physical tools and his production in college. But like, I think best case scenario for Ayton, even looking back, was like a Jared Allen plus type. Like that, like what Jared Allen has become essentially. That was like your best case outcome for DeAndre, like a super Jared Allen, which is still like an all-star level player. But when you have a guy like Luka on the board, it's just really tough to talk yourself into getting a traditional toolsy big who, it's just easier to find that guy than it is to find the high level offensive creator in the way that it is with Luka Doncic. So yeah, Ayton's a good one. All right. I'll do my spicy one again, because once again, there are so many worse picks that I could take here just from a player being bad instantly and fucking up a franchise. There are so many bad ones, but you know what? I'm going to go back to my 2018 pick here.
Okay.
I was going to do another spicy one, but this one isn't quite as spicy. I'm going to take Zaire Smith.
Oh, okay.
Now, Zaire was drafted outside of the lottery, but there's also context to this. The context is the Sixers had the 10th pick in the draft. Drafted Mikal Bridges. Everyone knows the fucking story. Traded him on draft night for the Suns, and everyone will say it was good value to trade for the 16th pick in the draft in Zaire and what became the 2021 Miami Heat pick 2 years later. At the time, it was an unprotected Heat pick, by the way. Unprotected, and everyone was like, the Heat might fucking suck. Until, a year later, the Sixers sent them Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, you always want to do that. You always want to send Jimmy Butler to a team when you have their unprotected pick.
Well, we already traded the pick, is the thing. This is why this is so bad. Okay, ready?
Okay.
So they do all that. They're still stockpiling assets, even after their really successful 2017-2018 season. They trade the hometown kid in Mikal Bridges when, by the way, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was also still on the board. I wanted them to draft Michael Porter Jr. or Mikal Bridges at the time. But all three of those guys were on the board. They decided to trade back. They take Zaire Smith at the 16th pick. Zaire's obviously has a fucking train wreck of a career in terms of has the peanut allergy, all that shit.
I was to say, it was not his fault, really.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. But at the same time, Zaire was always going to be a long-term, raw, athletic, long-term prospect. He was never going to be a day one plug-and-play like Mikal Bridges was.
No.
Even Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was pretty good as a rookie. But my point on this whole thing is that they got that pick from Miami. And they drafted Landry Shamet later. And then they turned around and they traded both of those things for Tobias Harris. So this directly led to the Tobias Harris trade.
Now it makes sense.
This directly, if you want to talk about damaging shit, directly led to Tobias Harris trade. They were fine sending Jimmy Butler to the Heat because they didn't have the Heat pick anymore. And they basically set up a scenario where they had to max Tobias. And they missed out on Mikal Bridges, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, all those guys. And then they were fine with letting Jimmy walk, even though they should have never been fine with that in the first place. But by the way, those two picks that they traded became Sadiq Bey and Trey Mann. So, you can live with the value that you gave up to get Tobias, but if you did not turn around and then max him on that contract, and you missed on the Zaire Smith pick completely. And by the way, even if they had stayed at 16, even if they traded back, they made that trade, they lost Mikal Bridges. Dante DiVincenzo was still on the board. Kevin Herter was still on the board within the next few picks. 2018, if you missed in 2018, you're brain dead. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it was impossible to do. Yeah.
Somehow we've had 3 picks from this draft that should have never happened. And we didn't even talk about Kevin Knox.
Yeah.
There's so many bad picks in this draft when you look back and you're just like, fuck, you were 1 pick away from glory and you decided to fuck it all up. So Zaire Smith ended up being the guy that I'm going to take here. So I think we're winding down to the last few picks here.
Let me get one more. Let me knife one more of my least favorite GMs on my way out the door.
Okay.
Now, some might say, Sam, this is petty. You just talked about how good this team is. There's no way this couldn't have been that damaging. But the Thunder taking Poku, in retrospect, I'm just going to say, can you imagine if this Thunder roster had Maxey, for example?
So Maxey and SGA would be the backcourt. Oh my God, that's insane.
Or how about this? How about they just have fucking Quickly, or
I think it's got to be Maxey, a Maxey level guy for me to really give a shit about this.
Bane was still on the
Sure,
board.
no, I know. I'm aware that the 2020 draft was insane in this range.
I'm just saying,
at the time I understood the pick, even if I didn't love it.
I mean, I did too, and I was fucking wrong. Mm-hmm. That's my thing. I think that the Thunder could have really put themselves in a god tier, no holds bars, and somehow
they kind of still have.
Well, this is what I'm saying. Because this was Presti's ask my landlord to raise my rent one, because this is the draft where it was impossible to miss, and this is the one he missed in. He nailed every other fucking pick besides, I guess, Usman Jang or whatever his name is, Usman, whatever his name. I forget his name. You know what I'm talking about.
But this is where I always disagree with you on team building. The reason that you get this many picks is because you can have misses like this, and it's fine, and it doesn't affect you basically at all. Because here's the thing: if they draft Maxey and they have SGA. Is he clubbing Maxey's leg and SGA's leg so that they have to sit out for the next years?
That's the argument, is that Poku is the tank commander, and then you don't get Chet.
You get Chet. They got Chet, and I mean J-Dub once again. That was what the pick that they traded for. But this is why you try to acquire as many picks and get as many assets to trade for guys and select guys that you like. Because at a certain point, basically what I'm trying to get at here is that Presti was given all of the power to do what Pinky wanted to do with the process, but just no holds bar. And he was able to still get, in addition to his MVP level candidate that he traded for, he also got 2 other All-Stars.
Well, no, the real reason that he was able to do what Presti didn't do is because he was able to trick everyone into thinking SGA was actually hurt, which Presti never pulled off successfully.
You're saying Embiid? Wait, what?
I'm saying that because he made it seem like them tanking was like, freak accident. SGA can't play again this year. That sucks. I guess we got to be bad again. Whereas if SGA played any of those seasons, they wouldn't have gotten a Chet pick. They wouldn't have gotten.
But if you had SGA and Maxey, you wouldn't ended up with those guys like Chet or J-Dub. Well, you probably would ended up with J-Dub because he was a Clippers pick. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Chet. Chet's the one. Like, so yeah, you could say that instead of that. But I don't know. I do think I feel like they would have maybe figured it out. Like if it was bad, like we saw that Sam Presti still sat guys who, like SGA wasn't hurt. Everyone's you didn't play in the Olympics. Like, he wasn't hurt. It was made up. It's Fugazi. You've been tricked. You've been tricked by the rat bastard Sam Presti. He would have found a way to sit good young Desmond Bane or good young Tyrese Maxey to make sure that they get that pick. So, now
unbelievable.
Pete, we didn't take Jared Culver because there wasn't anyone good on the board at that point.
I'm not taking Jared Culver because you got Anthony Edwards the next year. What are you complaining about? Oh no, you missed on Jared Culver. Who cares? You instantly got one of the best players in the NBA.
Shoot, we didn't get
the first pick the next year.
We didn't get Jackson Hayes or Rui Hachimura.
That's the thing. Yes.
Dang.
Like if you're missing on a player in a bad draft, I generally don't care unless it's the Tyler Herro example that I laid out earlier.
Peter just said in chat, okay, damn.
We're going in.
He comes in and we just start yelling at him.
No! How dare you? All right, so just to recap here, Marvin Bagley first, Marquel Fultz second, Jabari Parker third, my Chad pick of Tyler Herro fourth.
Yes, so good.
Who did you pick with the 5th pick?
I put Jaylen Smith to the
Jaylen Smith. That's a good one.
No.
Wiseman with the 6th pick. Poku with the 7th pick.
No, Ayton with the.
Ooh, Ayton.
Yeah.
Who did I take at 6?
You took Zaire Smith.
I did. Shit, I did take Zaire.
Yeah. And then I took Ayton. By the way, Jahlil Okafor skated on this one because I got a little cute and I needed to yell at Presti. But
okay, let's talk about Jahlil Okafor because I actually am I was kind of dumbfounded that I went back and I didn't really care about that one as much. Because that draft was
no.
Okay, so the Sixers then have Porzingis and Embiid who probably won't play together, and they're always both hurt. That's why I was like, I just can't really care about that. This isn't even a cope. I don't give a fuck now because it's like we're years in the future.
Yeah.
Like I cope with the Fultz and the Zaire picks, but with Okafor, bad draft. Devin Booker was never going top 3 in that draft, and he's the only one that would have really made a difference. Porzingis refused to work out with us, and his agent told us not to draft him, apparently. Which, fine, that happens all the time, and teams do it anyway, so they don't really have any control over that. Although I guess Porzingis could have been like, I'm going back to Europe, which guys never actually do that, even if they threaten it. But I don't know. My thing is like Porzingis is what is on his 4th team? Like, I don't know. Like, I just don't even think Porzingis and Embiid could work. They're never available at the same time.
Okay. You know what confirmed didn't work? Jahlil Okafor.
Agreed. And they also play at the same position. But I'm just saying in terms of like effect on a franchise.
You could have traded Porzingis at some point though.
That's the real point where because at one point I know for a fact there was a rumor that Phil Jackson tried to trade Porzingis like a year or two later for Devin Booker. And the Suns would have done it. So if that's the case, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Yeah. Like that if you use Porzingis as a trade chip in the same way that if you use Jahlil Okafor as a trade chip. Yeah. Because that was the idea behind that pick was like, okay, well, if one of them is I know I talked about the best player available versus fit thing, but like it is a little bit different when you have a center. Like if your best player is a center and you're drafting a 5 who cannot play with him, that is where I make the exception, because it's like that's why that pick was instantly bad for the Sixers.
Yeah.
Was because like if Okafor Nerlens was also on the team and Embiid was on the team, if any of those guys got healthy and good, the Okafor pick would be made redundant because everyone knew Okafor was probably going to suck.
Yeah.
He was just too bad defensively for a five. Because people will always do this thing where it's like, could you imagine if he was born in the 70s?
Yeah.
Could you imagine if he was, and then I'm like, yeah, I mean, probably would have had a really good career but like defensively, he was just never good enough to be a full-time 5 and he was drafted into literally the worst era possible when the league started shifting towards spacing and perimeter shit.
Yeah.
So, but in general, I don't really worry about the Okafor one as much, which seems insane. I know it seems like because he's one of the worst top 3 picks of the last decade, bar none.
I mean, if it's not Porzingis, then that draft gets ugly quick. It's Hezonja, Willie Cauley-Stein, Moutier, Stanley Johnson, Kaminsky, Justice Winslow. Like I liked Justice Winslow a lot in that draft, and I was fucking wrong. So Miles Turner's the first guy who's like a good player,
Also, Porzingis probably that feels like a hinky pick to me. Like it probably came down to Okafor or Porzingis for them.
Yeah.
Oh, we can draft the guy. I don't care if he has injury problems. We don't care about being good still. Yeah, we can just keep tanking in perpetuity. And also, we're going to draft the guy who we think has the most trade value that we could trade later, because I've already traded Michael Carter-Williams. Or at least at that point, I think he was trying to trade Mike. I think he might have done it at that deadline, if I remember correctly, 2015 deadline. But So you know what? Let's get spicy with the last pick.
Okay.
Because I'll make the last pick here. But before we name it off, let me tell you some picks that were objectively worse than this pick. Okay, ready?
Okay.
The Okafor pick is a disaster, as we just discussed. Dragan Bender, another Suns really bad pick. Absolute disaster. Okay. Kevin Knox, who we mentioned earlier, is a terrible pick. An underrated bad pick, not just for off the court reasons, but Miles Bridges traded for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on draft night.
That's tough.
That's a tough one. Everyone always talks about Luka. Trading Miles Bridges for at least Trey's made all-star teams. Like Miles Bridges, even if you take away all the bad people things that he does,
all his bad people behavior,
yes, that is one beyond. Is that he's just not even that good, and they just gave him a bad contract too. So, so there's that one. There's also one that I wanted to do. So I'm gonna see if you can help me pick here for the last pick.
Okay.
Because I think we covered every single one. Kira Smith was also a really bad one, because if they had not drafted Kira Smith, is it Kira Smith? Kira Lewis.
I was going to say, who is Kira Smith? Yeah.
Kira Lewis for the Pelicans is a really bad pick, because if they didn't take him, they probably take the other guard that's in the same mold as him, which is Maxey. They were very similar as prospects, and they took the wrong guy. Davion Mitchell's another one that I had on here that was pretty bad. I mean, especially when you consider they had Halliburton and Fox at the time.
Star in plain sight, though.
Yeah. Johnny Davis, obviously, instantly bad.
Yeah. Oh, how did I forget Johnny Davis? Oh, my God.
So bad it sent them into a rebuild. Like, that's the Washington Wizards who never rebuild. J-Dub was picked right after him.
That's like, that might be in my lifetime the one that was the most what the fuck, in the moment bad. Like, I remember the Cam Johnson pick kind of being like that, but Cam Johnson was obviously good.
Here's the thing: we all thought Cam Johnson was a reach.
Yeah,
but I was like, I like Cam Johnson as a prospect, though.
Yeah.
The only reason I thought it was crazy because he was 24 when he was drafted.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But I always was a Cam Johnson fan as a prospect. So. Johnny Davis instantly like the pretty bad pick, especially when you consider Jalen Williams was taken right after him. Someone said Frank Ntilikina over Donovan Mitchell in the comments. How about Luke Kennard? because at least the Knicks, like Knox and Ntilikina should be on the list of the worst picks, but the Knicks have figured it out in the years after that. The Pistons are still in piss and shit. And Luke Kennard was this is the Tyler Herro thing, basically. Where like Luke Kennard's a fine pick, and he's going to have a 10-year NBA career, 12-year NBA career. But to have Donovan Mitchell and Bam Adebayo be the next 2 picks, they were interested in Donovan Mitchell in that draft too. And their franchise is still in piss and shit 7 years later. Like, and by the way, there are probably worse Pistons picks I could take here. They've had a ton of them.
Oh my God.
But Luke Kennard just like being kind of decent and then having 2 legit all-stars go right after one all-NBA player.
God, that's so bad. Can I throw one out there that I is near and dear to my heart, but it's not that damaging, but it's one of these picks where both teams did so bad that it kind of offsets. The Marquise Chris for the Papagiannis swap is like
it was if I remember correctly, wasn't it Marquise Smith for Papagiannis and Harry Giles?
I think it was, and they also got the rights to Bogdan Bogdanović was like actually the most important part of that in that trade.
Ooh, so the Kings kind of cooked.
Yeah, the Kings kind of, but they drafted Papagiannis with that pick, who again is like Johnny Smith, and it was like everyone was like, "What the fuck?" It's like one of the most bizarre picks. Like this guy like wasn't even mocked as a second rounder, and they took him with the 13th pick. Like it was truly insane. Like,
yeah, that's really bad. And Papagiannis was was that 2017 draft?
I believe so. It was this Marquise Chris year. I think that was 2017. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry, 2016. 2016.
Okay, so maybe I'm conflating here because Harry Giles was 2017 draft. So I don't think they got. Did they get 2? So they got Bogdan and Papagiannis, and that was the trade for Marquise Chris?
There was another pick they got. It was number 8, 13, and 28. So let me see who 28 was. And they also got the.
It was Scott. It was Labassiere.
Yeah, that's what it was. Scout Labassiere, which is
who was like horrible in college, but was a top recruit the year before. So everyone was like, you might as well take him at the end of the first.
Yeah, he was like a guy who people kind of expected in that draft to go in like the 15 to like 20 range, and he slid out of that. And turns out it was for a reason because he was bad.
But I do just want to point out here, every player in that trade you just mentioned is a total shitter.
Yeah,
but Bogdan was good. That was a good trade. That was a good trade for the Kings if they were able to hold on to him.
That's what I'm saying because I went. The first thing I thought of when I was trying to think of like middle picks that were bad, well, like Papagiannis popped out, and I was like, what was that trade? Like, was there anyone good on the board? And there wasn't really. The board wasn't good until Pascal Siakam, which was like 12 picks later. So it's like that's not really worth it at that point. And the pick they traded was a Marquise Chris pick, which is not. It's not lighting anybody's like socks on fire. And the only person that was on the board after that, because it went Marquise Chris, Jakob Poeltl, and then Thonmaker, and then you had Sabonis at 11 was like the next.
He was really the only guy that got drafted there that mattered.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, just an honorable mention here. I have to throw this out because of the comment that was just left. The 16th pick in the 2012 draft obviously predates this range.
Yeah, we weren't doing that in the exercise, but obviously
we were doing to 2014. But we do have to give a shout out to Republican Senate candidate Royce White, friend of the show.
I agree with everything he's ever said. I love it. He's awesome because he's like, it's so funny to like track his thing because he was like a story guy. Like he was like, people don't understand mental health is so important and like anxiety makes you like,
because he didn't want to fly on planes.
Right. Exactly. Like that was his thing coming out of the draft. Because he was actually a pretty good prospect. I actually kind of wanted the Celtics.
He was a really good, and Morey drafted him because he was like, we're smarter than everyone else. We're going to take the guy who just falls that should have been drafted. And then he only played 3 games in the NBA ever, never played a game for the Rockets. And a year later in an interview, Morey said, this is something that I, a feather in my cap. We might have drafted the worst first round pick of all time in Royce White, because he's like, if you think about historically all the guys who never play in the NBA, it's always guys like in the 80s, it was like political reasons with like the USSR and like so, and then sometimes like guys in the like there was a Serbian guy I was reading about the other day. I can't even remember his name, but he just wanted to be like the GOAT in the EuroLeague. And he was like, I don't care. Like he would have been a good NBA player, but he decided never to come over. He was like, Royce White is the rare guy that got drafted, was an American player, and just never played because of this fear of flying that he had and could never get over the anxiety. And now he's a full-blown freshman.
Well, that's the thing is it's so funny to go from being like you should play Undertale.
Be nice to me. Yeah.
It shows what like Celeste is a video game about anxiety that I identify with to like blood and soil. Million Omar married her brother. Like just saying stuff like just insane stuff like that.
Tim Walz is changing our flag to look like the Somalian flag.
So he has.
Hey, why did your NBA career not work out? This is kind of shocking. I got to be honest. You seem like you would be a really good locker room guy, personally. Yeah.
He's so like he is like the ultimate grifter guy. Like he does have the ultimate grifter mindset, like to the point where like, I don't ever want to question anyone's like mental health, but like his trajectory since then just makes me think like, you don't seem to have any values or anything. You seem to just kind of do whatever makes life easiest for you. Yeah. So, that's interesting, but very funny. I am surprised he and Daryl didn't get along.
No, I'm surprised too. They didn't see eye to eye, clearly, you know.
No.
Maybe if he was good for the team, he would have respected him more.
Daryl's watching it with the Republican nomination. Oh, now he does it. We could have talked shop.
All right,
Danny
so
Ainge would have been all over that, by the way.
Just because I think the Pistons have been in such piss and shit since the 2017 draft, and we know how good Bam Adebayo and Donovan Mitchell are, that's my pick. Luke Kennard, even though Luke Kennard's fine. Like, nice. Once again, Luke Kennard's fine. And just one last one I want to throw out here that I did not get to mention. I wanted to do this one earlier. It was more of a double dip. I wanted to do the 2019 draft for the Hawks in general. Okay, ready? Use 2 picks to trade up that became Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jackson Hayes, so who really cares? Yeah. But they used those 2 picks to trade up and took DeAndre Hunter, who sucks, and they gave him a second contract, which sucked.
Yeah.
And
that is probably a pretty damaging thing, because the DeAndre Hunter contract is like quietly one of the worst contracts in the NBA. Yes. Like very damaging to them and their team. And then also later in that top 10 took Cam Reddish with the pick that they got in the Luka Doncic trade. So they double dipped on bad process, basically. One was fine process to get like an extra pick or whatever if you really wanted to take Trae Young, but to miss on that for Cam Reddish and then also trade up and get DeAndre Hunter and give him that second contract. And more importantly, neither DeAndre Hunter or Cam Reddish were healthy for their conference finals run, really. No. They barely played in those playoffs. It's probably why they did so well, to be honest. The Tyler Herro effect, by the way.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's incredible that they gave up so much shit to get these guys, that they really made their moves, that they signed DeAndre Hunter that second contract. That was the pick I was going to make earlier. But just a symbolic pick with Luke Kennard there, even though the Pistons have made way worse picks. And just before we wrap it up, friend of the show, Piss, tweeted this at me. I need your attention for this one. Friend of the show, Piss, tweeted this at me. I'm just saying, if you're the number 1 pick in a draft and your team is still the worst team in the NBA after 3 seasons, you have to be in this conversation.
I thought about it. The
problem
problem is that I don't think if Mobley were a little better, I would make the argument. But Mobley.
Well, Jaylen Green also has been underwhelming. Like if it's not like Luka was taken with the next pick, or like if one of those guys was taken, it would be like. Oh, and also, once again, Cade's kind of similar to Fultz. Like Fultz was the consensus pick at the time. That's like say what you will, Cade was the consensus pick. It's easy to say now, but like at the time, a lot of people were Cade as the obvious. Cade was being put in some crazy conversations at a minimum.
Scotty was seen as the reach, and he's clearly the number 1 player in that this like range so far.
Yeah.
Maybe Mobley. I don't know.
Mobley or Scotty, one of those two. In the top 5 of that draft?
Yeah. Because Franz is probably the best player in that
But
draft.
Franz was taken 8th. He was never
Yeah.
going with the first pick.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I guess Şengün is at 16, so that's way further down. But
Well, the reason I had Davion Mitchell on here was because imagine a world where the Kings apparently were linked to Şengün. Imagine a world where they draft Şengün, they don't draft Davion Mitchell. Maybe they can keep Fox and Halliburton together, or trade one of those guys for a wing, and then they don't trade for Sabonis because they have Şengün. That's why that's an impactful, tough trade or pick for them.
yeah, that's tough.
But just symbolically, I think Luke Kennard fits nicely on this list.
Yes.
I'll recap our top 10 here. Marvin Bagley, Marquel Fultz, Jabari Parker, Tyler Herro, Jaylen Smith, Zaire Smith, DeAndre Ayton, Wiseman. I think I switched up the Zaire and Wiseman positioning, but I'll re-listen on that. But they were selected either way. Poku and Luke Kennard. So that's it. The 10 worst picks of the last decade in terms of how badly they affected their franchise. Thanks for everyone who listened on here. By the way, I'm probably going to post this portion of the podcast publicly. If you want to watch the whole podcast, the first 30 to 40 minutes that we did, sign up for the Uniball Patreon. We will be doing 2 episodes a week again starting soon. Me and Sam have been doing 1 a week that are just going up on the Patreon recently. And if you want to sign up for Patreon, do not sign up on your Apple iPhone. Apparently, they are taking 30% of the proceeds when you sign up on Patreon. You will not be affected for this if you're already signed up for Patreon. But if you do sign up for Patreon and you have an iPhone, sign up on your web browser so that you don't get charged that. Just a little thing that Patreon sent out this week because we don't want them taking 30% of our money.
No, don't you? Would you rather have Steve Jobs as Ghost using that to treat his cancer with fruit juice, or would you rather give it to Trill and I to tell you again about how funny a Good Place episode was in 2015 at the top of the episode for 30 minutes? It's up to you. Pick your poison.
Either or.
Yeah.
Either or.
Oh.
All right. Sign up for the Patreon. We're going to have a lot more good shit. I actually am working on a few things right now. We have a lot of exciting things in the works. So
we're cooking.
Sign up. Support us. Take care. Bye.
Peace.